Hi guys. You've been through quite a long and thoughtful day so far. So this is the the final lap of the marathon, and I hope it will be worthwhile. I'm Adina Goldman, and I am a graduate student at Princeton. I'm in the religion department, and I specialize in rabbinic literature and ancient Christianity. But we're not here to talk about any of that today. Instead, actually, this panel follows quite beautifully on the panel that we just had, because we just had an in-depth discussion of translation. Translation as a practice, its problems, its opportunities. But I actually want to bring us to what is one of the most commonly practiced forms of translation, and that is translation in real time. That is to say, teaching and learning. Professor Wiskind's translation practice, as we're soon going to hear, is actually deeply embedded with and connected to her teaching practice. And I am the person who has been brought in to discuss this with Ora because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this myself. I don't have anywhere near the depth of teaching experience that Professor Wiskind has, but I've been a student for a long time, and so I've been the recipient of a lot of teaching, and it's good, it's bad, it's ugly. You know, I've seen it all. And at this point in my life, I would define the problem of teaching as an extremely basic one. There is, in fact, I think, only one problem in teaching. Everything else just boils down to it, and that is the problem of the gap. How do you, as a teacher, identify the gaps that your students have in their understanding that will prevent them from receiving what it is that you have to offer? In fact, this is the problem of every act of communication, as we learned, but it is acutely practiced and sort of acutely interrogated, challenged, worked through in the teaching environment. So that is what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss teaching and its relationship, and learning and their relationship with Hasidic texts. From a very practical perspective, how does that play out? What do religious texts in general, Jewish texts, and especially Hasidic texts offer as unique vehicles in the teaching environment that is different from what other texts can offer? So I'd actually like to start off with a very sort of concrete entry point to this conversation. I'd just like to start with a sort of description. Professor Wiskind, can you tell us a bit about the teaching environments that you inhabit and who the population of students is that you work with, and what you understand to be their needs? What are their needs? Maybe we'll get to what you want to give them, but what are their needs especially?
Okay. So I basically was a student when I was here in the States. I left after I'd finished my bachelor's degree. I went a couple places, and I finally managed to get to Israel, and then spent a lot of time as a student there, and then I sort of accidentally became a teacher. I taught Ulpan after I learned Hebrew, and then I started teaching undergraduate students in Michlalah. After a few years, I started teaching in the Lander Institute in Jerusalem. At the time, my students this is a master's degree, men and women. I'll just go on to the next stage, which becomes more interesting. The Lander Institute went bankrupt, and their program was bought by Ono Academic College. The student body changed from being, I guess, modern Orthodox Haredi, which it had been in the Lander Institute, and became about 80% secular, Israeli secular. I always taught in Hebrew, never taught in English since I've been in Israel. And that was really my first, okay, now I'm the head of a graduate department in Michlalah, which has basically a Haredi and modern Orthodox student population. Most of our students at Michlalah are between 30 and 60 years old. Most of them come to their studies with years of teaching experience after the army. Most of them have large families or small families, but they're not then they're all working people. So that's a student, they're very different from undergraduates in terms of what they're looking for. Many of them are looking for earning more money in their own work, so they needed a master's degree. But most of them, especially the women, come back to learning because they really want some kind of renewal. They invest in a year of, usually they're on sabbatical if they're educators, and they're looking for some kind of growth, personal growth, sometimes things they can bring back to the classroom or to their other, whatever it is that they do. And so it's a very privileged time for them that they're really looking for ways to grow. I'll just go back to Ono for a minute. So there, the student body was new for me. That I had most of my time in Israel, it's taught religious people of various degrees, and I, also as a Ola Chadasha, which I still am, even though I've been in Israel for more than 30 years, I have the new immigrant mentality. Being an outsider, I'm American, I'm a woman, I'm a Baal Tshuva. It was a real challenge to teach secular students, but I found it really fascinating in the sense that many of my students had very strong Jewish identity without knowing very much at all about Jewish tradition. So it was the kind of thing that they would be really excited that they found a translation into Hebrew of the book of Job, for example. That I taught Job, and one of them was all excited that she managed to find a translation. She actually understood what it said. It was Hebrew to Hebrew. But, and then they would tell me things like they were at the hairdresser and the hairdresser's talking to them about her problems, and my secular student is explaining to her about hashgacha pratit and, the meaning of suffering and all that, which she had learned in my class. So it was, I guess, in terms of what students need, I think in terms of that secular population, I think that people were really looking for a close connection to the sources that sort of reinforced what they already felt about being Jewish. It was very exciting for many of them to have that sort of textual basis filled in. Religious students have a different, gap that they're trying to fill, which is to find meaning in the sources that they may have learned or not learned before, but to relate to them on a different level. So there the challenge is putting aside what I have been taught or think I know and trying to open up to something else. So I want to relate to one last thing that you said, even though you want to ask more about it. I don't feel like I come to teach with something to give. I feel like the gap is helping people understand what they're looking for.
Thank you. Something that is really interesting in your experience is this sort of, you really have a bifurcated population that you've taught. You have, people coming with very intense and serious Jewish education and limited, let's call it secular education, for lack of a better term. And you have people who have just the opposite, right? And so you're trying to, but you're a teacher of Hasidut, you're a teacher of Jewish texts, and so you are actually offering the same thing to both populations, but what they're receiving is obviously going to be quite different. And so I guess something that we've discussed and that I would love to hear you reflect on is what teaching strategies do you use to help students approach a text like it is new to them? And I'm going to clarify for the crowd what I mean by that. We talked a lot in the translation panel that we just had, or at least it was implicitly talked about, the sort of illusion of understanding in a way, right? Like you come to a text, let's say the text is in English. I'm a person who knows English, right? Why should I be missing anything about this text? And I encounter this in my own experience because I deal a lot with very ancient texts, and so that gap of time, that gap of geography is a big one. And I have students who think that they know what's going on, and they really, really do not. And so there are two different kinds of problems that you experience when you have a population of people who is deeply learned in these materials and assumes that they understand them, but they are approaching something new and they don't know that they are. And then you have a population that does know that they're approaching something new, but they have their own set of baggage. So what are some of the strategies that you use in the classroom to sort of help students understand or help students take ownership on one level, but also recognize where they are beginners in a certain way, cultivating, I mean, this is from the sort of Buddhist concept, or the beginner mind, cultivating a sort of approach to the text as though it is truly something that is foreign, and you come into it with the approach of like learning your way into it. And so what kinds of strategies can help you accomplish that with students?
Okay, it's a great question. I think that I actually want to address sort of one of the problems or questions that I had sort of approaching this whole meeting, that my academic world is not American students. You know, my students are native Hebrew speakers, and we're dealing with Hebrew texts. So we have sort of the whole stage is different than it is for, I guess, American students whose first language is English approaching Hebrew texts. But I guess we could say that my problem is even more acute because the text seems to be familiar and we've seen it before, and we, understand more or less what some of the words mean, and that feeling of familiarity is certainly very strong. So I guess one thing first of all, it is interesting that we're talking about texts here. We're not just talking about history or some larger field of learning that you can assume you have some kind of knowledge. We're talking about teaching texts. So what I try to start out with is actually the familiar. If I'm talking about a sermon that has a pasuk that it starts out with, or a midrash or something like that, I'll start with the primary text that's embedded within the text that I'm trying to teach. And we'll look at it. We'll try to figure out and remember the context or describe the context depending on what the background that people have. And then I usually start asking questions. And the questions that I'll ask are the questions that my text is going to treat. And I think that the best way to bring people in is to sort of enable them to say what they know. So first you'll have people, explaining the pshat or the drash or whatever it is that they know about a text. Got that onto the table, and then everyone's convinced each other that they're really very knowledgeable about this text. And then you can sort of like put that all aside and start asking questions. And the questions that I usually start to ask are the ones that my text will be relating to. And the first thing that it does is put people a little bit off balance, because as soon as you start asking questions, you can try to look for the Rashi or the other commentary that you think will give you the answer. And my students, I remember when I taught undergraduates, their first question was like, well, why don't you give us the commentaries? Like, what do you want us to do with the text all by ourselves? And the answer is, well, yeah, I do. Like, it doesn't matter what Ramban said at this particular point in time. Like, what are we going to do with it? So that's sort of a reminder that it really, we're dealing with an unknown here, and we have to dialogue with the text and ask it questions and listen to its answers. And that sort of opens up people to realize that there's something here that the text has to give them.
That point that you the last comment, there's something here that the text has to give them. Like in everything that I've read that you've written and everything that you kind of bring forth, and especially in the selection of the Hasidic texts that you want to offer people, like you're not taking all Hasidic. You're offering very specific excerpts, and it's because like something that really seems to motivate you is that you want to reach people in a certain way, and that's an extraordinary thing, and it's a sort of you want people to be touched, and in a way, I mean, as we've noted in one way or another, this symposium is about an encounter between two different kinds of learning and teaching, right? And one of the things that, we're here, one of the reasons we're here is that the Western Academy, especially in America, has in some ways become very suspicious of allowing texts to touch you. And you come from a world, and you come especially from an academic world in which that's not the case. And so I'd love for you to talk about why it is for you that religious texts are such a powerful vehicle for teaching and learning, as opposed to any other kind of text. Like, I'm a literature nerd. I would very happily sit down and read Chaucer with people. But like, that's not, I mean, unless you're, Chaucer from, which I definitely am, that's not going to touch you where the Piasetzner is going to touch you. And so, or, maybe it is, but what is it for you about your choice of texts to learn and to teach that enables an encounter which is not as easy to achieve? I'm not saying impossible, not as easy to achieve in other forms of texts.
Okay. It's really, I have to say, very, the question itself, I mean, I'm a real black sheep in my field. Like, most people in academia, well, I'll just put it this way. I wrote my dissertation on Reb Nachman. I got, in Hebrew University, it gets given to 3 readers. 2 of them approved it. 1 of them rejected it. I spent a year responding to her objections to my dissertation. And her main objection was that it was impressionistic and associative and too emotional and involved in the text in a personal way that wasn't appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. This was in the early 90s. And it's been an upward battle ever since. So I'm certainly not a representative of what Israeli academia is all about. In fact, even in America, what's written about Hasidut, there aren't very many people who write like I do. So it's really totally hashgacha pratit that I've actually been given the honor and recognition that I have because it's not the kind of engaged learning that's really accepted in any field. So I'll go I guess to go back to your question, I think that it's, for me, the choice that I've made to deal with, I mean, my background is in literature. And I do believe that, literature engages us or is supposed to engage us on that level, not of the intellect, but, something lower, more deep, in the human gestalt. So literature does it, and Hasidus does it, because really, I think the kind of communication that I'm interested in and the kind of learning or teaching that I'm interested in inducing is transformative. I think that's what the texts demand of us, whether it's a Hasidic text or a religious text or a literary text. It's more than being moved. I think that what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do as a writer, as a teacher, is help people become something more than they are. And the first stage in doing that is recognizing that you don't know and that you don't understand, and that the text is there in order to say something to you. And the only way that you can hear it is to open yourself up to it and accept the fact that you're missing something, and the text has come and is summoning you to meet it. So I think that many texts can potentially do that. Certainly religious texts have that as an agenda, that they are out to enact some kind of transformation in people who learn them. And Hasidic texts in particular, because they have the holiness that we believe that this religious tradition was given. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, something that I'm hearing, and also something that's coming out as a reflection for me from today, is, I think that the Jewish learning tradition and the Western learning tradition, I'm obviously painting with very broad brush here, but bear with me, right? I think that they excel at very different things. I think that, any deep religious tradition, if you're learning inside of it, but we're talking about the Jewish tradition, it could apply equally to others, but it excels in being in it, right? It excels in having you be inside the thing and sort of being one with the. We dealt in the second panel with this issue of what are we doing here? Why are we? What is this Hasidus thing that we're talking about? And the sort of reticence of the Rebbe Rashab to sort of engage that question. Like, this is a troubled question, right? Like, we are meant to be inside the thing. We are not meant to be reflecting on the thing. That's a stepping outside. And so the Western tradition, in a way, excels at that stepping outside and that moment of critical reflection. But it's interesting because you are engaging in a kind of mixed practice. Even though your practice is very religious in a certain way, you are actually teaching in a sort of an academic environment in the Western model, one way. And part of the strategy of all learning is that you actually do need a certain amount of distance in order to recognize what you're missing. Maybe that distance, maybe what should happen is the distance is a pathway in, right? The distance is a pathway back. But it's like, if you are a Haredi and you come from that kind of intensely Jewishly educated background, in a way you're too close to see what you're missing, right? And so you have to be, and so that's actually maybe the promise of the academic environment, is to be able to step back for a second and see what you can't see, and then be able to come close in a new way. And for the secular students, it's actually quite different. I'm wondering what your experience is there, and whether you see that in yourself, these two movements, or whether that's not the right characterization.
I don't know. I think maybe I want to emphasize something a little bit different in terms of Jewish texts and Jewish tradition and the way that people interact with them, the outside and the inside. I think this one element that we talked about a little is the dialogical aspect of Jewish texts, which I think is really a key here, because we have dialogues, whether it's in, the Gemara, or there we have lots of people talking, or the Zohar. In most of our texts, we have more than one voice. Many Jewish texts are based on two views or some kind of interrogation, questions and answers. I mean, the whole answering a question with a question, that's the Jewish way of trying to understand anything. So basically in our teaching, we're adopting that, or I am anyway, in my attempt to transmit Jewish teachings in a way that really engages students, because you're outside of the text, but ask it questions and you'll come in, it'll let you in, and then you're able to bring your world in, because the text, we are what we are in our context, in our social, historical context. We can't be anything else besides ourselves. And the text is what it is. It's ensconced in the words on the page. But still there's that dialogue that's possible, and to encourage people to enter that dialogue with the text from where they are is the most promising way to actually have the text respond to us authentically and in a language that's ours, after all, because it's mirroring our interrogation of it.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that, because I was hoping you would bring that out, and I'm wondering in particular, what is it about Hasidic texts that are particularly powerful in terms of the sort of dialogical? Judaism definitely excels at the dialogical, no question. And so I'm wondering how those bring it out. And I'm also wondering, and this is just, you can hold this and decide if you have an answer for it, but I'm wondering if there's a favorite text that you had. You brought one today, and maybe that's your favorite text, but I'm wondering if there's something that really sits with you, that you carry in your pocket, that you bring out for yourself. So there's Hasidic text as dialogical, and I'm wondering if you can comment on that, but there's also, what do you carry with you every day?
I think we saw it in the text, in the sermon of the PSS Nagabi that we read before. He asks questions like, what does this mean for us? How can we understand this today? And I think that that's sort of a basic pedagogical kind of a move that's really intrinsic to Hasidic thinking in general. In other words, that the whole idea is, that's what actually Glenn, I think, mentioned it in the Bala Toldot, that the Rabbi Yaakov Yosef asked, well, what does this mean? The text of the Torah is eternal, so what does it mean for us? It has to be eternal and mean something for everyone in every generation, but here we are right now. What does the text mean for us now, today? So I guess that's one, because that's such a cogent element of Hasidic teaching in particular, I guess that makes it something that's so immediately apparent and available as a teaching, as an ideal kind of a teaching material for now. And the other question was?
Is there a text that you keep in your pocket?
No. It depends on the day and what I'm writing about. Every text is sort of the one that I'm living as I live it. I did want to just relate to something that came up in the other session that really, I have to say, when I was writing every book that I've written, I've sort of felt like I have a special connection with the Rebbe that I'm writing about. And when I was writing Hasidic commentary, I used to daven on the roof of our house and sort of ask whatever Rebbe it was to sort of tell me the secret, what he really meant in whatever sermon I was writing about. And yeah, it worked. I think, I feel like I sort of managed to say something authentic. And so yeah, I'm very much where I am. That's my Torah.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. And with that, we'll open up for one or two questions, if there's anything on people's minds. Yes, over here.
I'm wondering whether you think your approach could work in an American university. In other words, one of the things, like in Israel, like at first there was sort of dispassionate study of Kabbalah and Hasidus, and then sort of the students of Shalom and the grand students sort of started being people who were engaging from a religious place. Do you think, and particularly in secular universities in America, obviously in a place like Yeshiva University or something, it might be different, but do you think there's room for what you're doing? In other words, that woman who basically said, you're too you're too emotional, you're too engaged. Do you think American universities could welcome what you're uniquely doing?
Well, it's a great question. I'll say I'm very iconoclastic because I think that only a woman could do what I'm trying to do. I think that it's the kind of, well, maybe there could be someone else who can, but I think that it demands a lot of sort of breaking the norms. I probably would be really politically incorrect here, so I don't know what I would be able to do, but it's sort of the same way that people taught Hasidic. In the beginning, it was like these small circles of people who were Anshe Shlomenu. And I guess you have to win your audience before you can start teaching them. So I don't know if I want to take up that challenge, though. I'm happy where I am.
So I'm working with somebody who's writing a translation of the Rebbe's discourses, his sichas, for a popular audience. And he's interspersing the text with pop culture references from the 90s, from when he was pre-Baal Tshuva, so that people who don't know the Rebbe's texts, sichas, could like access them. So the question I have is that he's actually separating his book into the literal translation of the Rebbe's sichas, and then all the pop culture references are endnoted to kind of keep a separation between the holy and the mundane. So when you're doing your translation work, is that something that you are aware of or cognizant of? Is the holiness of the thing you're working with, does that impact how you decide to translate things, or the way in which you choose to translate particular aspects of it?
It's a great question. I've actually been sort of struggling with that all through the day, because basically the question is, how do you establish your presence as a translator, as an interpreter in the text that you're presenting? So you see, even in the text that we have in the booklet, you have the super text on the top, and then you have the subtext, which is like the iceberg. It's much bigger than the part on the top. That's one way of doing it. What I usually do, and again, it doesn't work if you have a whole work that you're translating it literally from beginning to end. I don't do that kind of translation. It's exhausting. And usually I don't think it's very effective, because most texts aren't uniformly engaging. Most texts have, the highlight parts that you really can get the spirit of the text from there. And as an English speaker or someone who doesn't have access to the Hebrew text, I personally don't think that's the most effective way to give over the Torah of any particular author. So what I prefer is sort of prefacing text that I want to present with something more analytical or background, historical, ideological, whatever it is, to sort of couch the text in a larger context. And then I'll bring the text itself. What I usually try to do is bring a block of text without getting in the way, to let my reader encounter it. And then you have readers of different levels who will be able to appreciate it and will want to see it in and of itself. And then the next thing that I do is sort of unpack it. And there I'll bring in the footnotes if there's some kind of an allusion and explain things. But I do this dance between the text and myself and my voice as an interpreter. That's sort of the method that I've developed over the years, which I personally find the most communicative and engaging. I try to preserve the voice of the text in the block quote that I bring, but I really believe that my task as a teacher, translator, I'm teaching when I'm writing as well, is to be the intermediary for this text in a really global kind of a sense, that it's me teaching it, it's not the Rebbe himself, but I try to be as loyal to him as possible, so that a big apparatus of notes, I find that alienating. It makes the reader like jump up and down, and ultimately I don't feel that it does justice to the text. It makes it too foreign. So yeah, that's the good.
Okay, I think we're actually going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Adina and Professor Wiskind, for a wonderful session.